Hello, my name is Brian O. This is a very important video, as important as the main video, if not more important, giving a larger and higher perspective. I assume that you have watched the main video. If you have not, please do so first. The movie The Mission, 1986, featuring Robert De Niro, Jeremy Irons, and Liam Neeson, has been my favorite movie, especially during my young years. If you have not watched this wonderful movie, I highly recommend you do. The complete trailer I made will be played at the end of this video. At the same time, it will show something I wrote titled The Unfinished Mission. I know it needs improvement. I will be editing it later, but I needed to release something now. The movie is based on the historical struggle of evangelized Guarani people against the cruel colonial powers in mid-18th century. The largest concentration of the remnant of Guarani people lives in Paraguay today. Today's Guarani in total are estimated to be from hundreds of thousands to over 5 millions, depending on the definition. The Iguazu Fall of the opening scene is located near the border of Paraguay. Guarani is one of the two official languages in Paraguay, Spanish being the other. Public schools all teach Guarani mandatorily. The movie, along with its timeless soundtracks, deeply impacted not only me, but many people I know. Therefore, the sacrifices of Guarani people, in part, shaped my formative years and were responsible for who I am today. So they actually blessed me first before I could ever bless them back. I only realized this after arriving here. So as I was researching and thinking for the movie and for this video, I truly realized for the first time why I am in this predicament, needing to reach out to you instead of trying to do everything on my own. It's because the call is so much grander. The call the movie invokes, or the call from God today, is so much weightier than what any one person could accomplish in his life, especially if he tries to do things on his own, without making connections to the rest of the world, and without doing so arduously and also wisely, I assume. So running out of money, needing to raise funds, God using three individuals in particular just in time to change my perspective on fundraising. My friend Lawrence Livingston asking me to make a video, and while making the first video, myself coming to better understand what I am supposed to accomplish here and how. And then now, finally seeing a grander vision of God, of which I am a small part. I believe all these were part of God's plan. So 400 years ago, there were people in the West who believed in Guarani people and co-created a new kind of mission towns called reductions. And what blossomed there was nothing short of a cultural revolution. I'm quoting from a YouTube video titled Jesuit Reductions, a Hidden Cultural Revolution.
Imagine a place where two worlds collided. Yet instead of conflict, something extraordinary blossomed. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Jesuits missionaries established reductions in the heart of South America, primarily in the present-day Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. These settlements were unlike any other. Here, indigenous Guarani communities and Jesuits co-created towns where language, music, and craftsmanship thrived. The Guarani learned to build European-style instruments, compose intricate music, and master new trades, while Jesuits embraced local languages and customs. Reductions became self-sufficient, with theaters, printing presses, and even libraries, rare in the region at the time. Their unique governance blended indigenous traditions and new ideas, fostering cooperation and innovation. The Jesuits also introduced agricultural techniques and organized communal labor, which improved living standards and social cohesion. Despite resistance from colonial authorities and the eventual expulsion of the Jesuits in 1767, the legacies of reductions endure and preserved ruins and vibrant cultural traditions. This remarkable chapter of history reveals how curiosity, respect, and collaboration can really shape societies and leave a lasting impact.
I am now quoting what's written about books about Guarani missions. I'm sorry I don't have these books yet. It's kind of hard getting these books from down here, and I didn't really have the time. I needed to release these videos now.
In the long, tortured history of European colonization of the Americas, these Jesuit blackrobes in Paraguay stood out as a breed apart, even from their fellow Jesuits elsewhere. Leaders of the anti-Catholic, anti-Jesuit Enlightenment, such as Voltaire and Raynal, a historian, rallied to the side of these extraordinary Paraguay missionaries. Raynal wrote that never has so much good been done for mankind with so little evil.
So these Enlightenment leaders who were anti-church, anti-cleric, even ended up praising the fruits of the missions, recognizing it as a bright light. And for one of their harsh critics to utter something like, never has so much good had been done for mankind with so little evil, is just astounding. And that happened here among these people. Another book illustrates the 30 Guarani missions as the largest and most prosperous of all Catholic missions. Now, this author highlights the marvel of self-sufficiency it achieves and states that scholars have not focused on this important aspect enough. In this book, the author demonstrates that Guaranis had exercised a great deal of autonomy in the mission towns, which is unlike other missions. Guaranis were deciding things on their own. There is even a book titled, They Built Utopia, the Jesuit Missions in Paraguay, 1610 to 1768. I am amazed. These were never achieved before. Of course, it wasn't the greatest human achievement ever, but perhaps the greatest human achievement of the kind up to that point in history. And this was probably well beyond what most of the first generation Jesuit missionaries to Guaranis must have envisioned. I don't know if God gave any of them a glimpse of the future. I would have to research on that. It reminds me God choosing Israel not because they were strong and mighty. Even Paul writing about God choosing the weak and the laughable to shame the wise and the strong. Looking at history, this keeps on happening. I'm Korean. 70 years ago after the war, we were like babies. So perhaps our job is not to be satisfied with God bringing us to the top, but to look for who may become the next, the weak and the laughable God will choose. And maybe that's why some of us were brought to the top. I read about some seeing 5,000 pages of music scores Guarani themselves wrote in Western style. Also about some 16,000 pages of them in Bolivia. That's many generations of work. It hints at the richness of the rest of the culture. The fact that Guarani themselves became the driving force after the initial help. So just imagine 300 years ago, you're walking through Amazon jungle and you find a town where the Aborigines in their brown skins are playing their own orchestra music with choirs in these grandiose buildings they built. And you'll be wondering if this is even real. In the movie, they try to show this surrealness of it all by the facial expression of the fictionalized character, Cardinal Altamirano. By the way, Altamira is the name of a company that built a series of high-rise residential buildings here in Asuncion, Paraguay. One of those buildings happened to be the first place I stayed in Paraguay. I ended up staying in the building for 2 months. First 2 weeks on the lower floor, the rest of the time towards the top of the building. Altamira in Spanish means high view, high viewpoint. Maybe it was a sign that God wanted to give me a grander perspective, as his instruction as I was coming into Paraguay was to explore the land. My original plan was to just do nothing and just pray until God tells me something. But I met Marisol staying in the building. Anyways, what I wanted to say is that surrealness deserved more than just the facial expression from the cardinal. So where the movie leaves off in 1986, we pick things up almost 40 years later. That was as far as the movie could go. They succeeded. Now the baton is handed off. So this is one of my tasks, our task. Please help me. It is to provoke the world to remember what an amazing thing happened here. Not only the followers of Jesus, Yeshua, but also all humanitarians or humanists of any religion or of no religion. And really all who possess a human heart for that matter. They should be able to evaluate and then to appreciate its true worth at the time in history. Because history not only teaches us not to repeat a mistake, but also how to repeat a great achievement. And we need to help the world to be able to mourn the great loss when they learn how sadly, how unjustly it all ended and were destroyed by those who did not understand the true worth of what was created here. And then, so importantly, for each listener to be able to hear from a human heart the calling, the call to rebuild. The abruptness of the disruption only points our generation to the call to finish the unfinished mission. And finally, for them to be able to see the future God wants to make into reality. Begin to see from now, almost 40 years from the release of the movie. The movie then was a prophetic urge, made cause a yearning in your heart. The disruption began when the whims of the colonial powers brought the whole mission to an untenable place. The priests and Guaranis were ordered to leave the missions. Guaranis and many Jesuit priests refused. They took a stand to protect what they built for God and themselves for 160 years. This ensued their death and destruction. I realized the dying priests and the dying Guarani people must have been praying in their last moments on the ground. What else? What do you think they prayed? Oh, destroy the Western civilization too. No, I don't think so. Thousands of Guaranis would have prayed, number one, what they built for 160 years, which became the marvel to the world, will not be forgotten forever. Two, what is being destroyed now will be rebuilt someday. And three, when it's rebuilt, it would surpass in glory the one being destroyed then. So rebuilding of their sanctuary would be the predominant theme, I suppose. The rebel Jesuit priests who stayed with Guaranis are estimated to be from dozens to hundreds. And I think at least some dying Western priests, on the other hand, would have prayed that there would be another people in another time who would somehow come to believe in the same people again and start something new, a new sanctuary, something for which they will need outside help in the beginning. But soon they will take over. They will be self-sufficient. They will perfect it themselves. They will perfect themselves in the process. Of course, there won't be no perfection in this world, but you know what I mean. They will perfect it as much as it is humanly possible in this time in history. But it will be a marvel and a bright light to the world, which anyone on the street will simply recognize from all parts of the world. Again, the rebuilding of their sanctuary, all this is just very connected to what I was thinking of building for my two spiritual children. And that thought was formed before this research, independently from what the movie helped me realize. Of course, I wasn't thinking about building a physical sanctuary, but a conceptual one where the children will be protected and are brought up very specially. I'm not making things up. Even the self-sufficiency part of our vision here, which I talked about in the main video, was very much the most distinctive and praiseworthy characteristic of Guarani missions, different from elsewhere. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, the initial Jesuit visionaries did not bring in an existing system from outside, unchanged and intact, but were willing to try something new, adapting to the need and circumstances on the ground, and also seeking God's design to improve what they already had. That was so crucial for their success, and that was exactly what I proposed to do in the main video, creating something different, shifting toward pure Yeshua's design and instructions, starting in 2026 on the 40th year from the release of the movie. So by your help, in partnership in this holy connection, if we could get off the ground and start building the special sanctuary I proposed in the main video, perhaps years later, one would have to say, yes, it was indeed an answer to the larger call from God, the call to finish the unfinished mission, and that it was an example of modern day rebuilding of Guarani missions, and that it was God's small answer to the last wishes of dying priests and Guarani people. I pray that we will at least play a small but central part, you and I together. But independently from what we will do, I pray that many others will hear the call and pray and receive visions and missions from God for these people on their own. And then many more will choose to support those missions as financial and prayer partners as well. But going beyond that, some would actually come physically here to become a part of the rebuilding. We cannot do it alone. We all need to be connected, super connected. All our efforts will lead to one overarching goal if we are connected. Thus, I would like you to play more than a small part in reviving this call to finish the unfinished mission. Please help me. The movie's 40th anniversary is coming up, October 1st, 2026. It is the last day of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacle, the seventh day of the feast, the completion of the most joyful holiday. Maybe you could write to some key people. I don't know. But remember God telling Cain, his brother Abel's blood is crying out to him from the ground. Would God, who remembered a murder of one righteous man, forget thousands of Guaranis? Abel was killed by Cain, who didn't understand how valuable Abel's offering was to God, how much of a pleasure it was to him. In the same way, the political elites of the colonial powers didn't understand how special were these people and the true value of what they offer God. What Guarani built, I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but it was at least one of the greatest marvel and the brightest light to the world, even to the unbelievers at the time in history. Would he forget? I leave the answer to you. But if you are one of those who will say, he will remember, then your answer presupposes that there is a call, the call to finish the unfinished mission. The movie was and is a prophetic urge that outsiders like you and I should believe in them once again and build something new together with them. God likes to use his special people for his special purposes. I remember watching a video showing that Pyongyang revival, the Korean revival of 1907, started near the building where one of the first Western missionary martyrs was killed or where he resided. This is not widely known fact yet, I don't think. So what would happen here? The land of thousands of martyrs. So in the main video, I showed a type of special unique sanctuary I need to build here, starting with just 2 children, then a dozen, and then series of dozens. In this video, hopefully I have uncovered to you a grander plan of God, of which our specific vision as of now will play a small part. I hope I showed that the grander plan is so special because at its foundation lies the blood of His righteous and thousands of the innocent, a very special people. It's so special because it will be God's response to voices crying out from the ground continuously their dying wishes. It's so special because what two different group of people brought forth together in harmony was so extraordinary, especially to God. It will be so special because when our yearning becomes a reality and they become the marvel of the world again, the world won't say, oh, it was because they were the smartest, had the most resources and infrastructure to breed the next leaders. It will be a testimony that there's a God who honors the humble, God who chooses to make the most precious jewels out of scrap metals to adorn Himself. Although what they built was Heavenly Father's prized possession, time had passed, mostly forgotten, but it is to be remembered and resurrected in our days. So God needs you. May God use you as informers and mouthpieces of this call to finish the unfinished mission. Maybe you have a megaphone or know someone who does, or God will simply give you one for this. I cry so much making these videos. This is how God communicates with me for the most important things. Brian, there's something very deep here I would like you to keep searching for me. I'm Korean. Korea had experienced the horror of colonialism for less than 40 years. Thank God it didn't last hundreds of years. We would have been a completely different people. But Guarani people are still living under the effect, as many mothers are having to offer their children for the worst kind of use in return for food right now, at this moment. There needs to be a general revitalization of economy in the poorest regions. And just pouring in millions of dollars unwisely will not produce the result God is looking for. It would be our and our children's great challenge to find the wise and effective ways and to obtain the power and might we need to create the spark. A miracle happened here once before, when it was just a dream and looked like a costly experiment with no guarantee whatsoever. But today, we have the benefit of hindsight. It will happen again, by the help of those who will believe in them again. Together we can bring a distant future and now a nostalgic past into now and reality. What will be resurrected here might just be an important piece of the puzzle God needs to complete as His last day plan for the world. And reminding you, we are just one long-term minded decision away from being a great ancestor our future needs. Thank you again for listening. I bless you from Paraguay as a great ancestor our future needs. See you again.